In almost every country in the world, people are living longer and longer each year. The problem is that the number of years of life in good health is declining each year, resulting in an increasing gap between length of life and healthy years. This is called the Healthspan gap, and it is something that we can reduce dramatically in our own lives and across society as a whole by taking some specific actions. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Fitness Roadmap. I'm Mark Sinderson, and I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining me today as we talk about the increasing health span gap, what it is, why it matters, and what you can do to close that gap in your own life. There's a quote by Abraham Lincoln that says, "In the end, it's not just the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years." When he said that way back in the day, he was talking about health span versus lifespan. He may not have known it at that time, but that's essentially what he was talking about. So today, if we care about wanting to live a long and healthy life, the words lifespan, health span, and health span gap should be at top of our minds. The idea of living longer while having good health is what we're trying to achieve. People often say that they want to live as long as possible. In other words, what they're saying is lifespan. But what they most likely really want to have is a long health span. Here's the difference. Lifespan is essentially the length of time a person exists or lives. Health span, on the other hand, is defined as the number of years that someone can expect to live in reasonably good health, or the period of good health in a person's life. Any difference between lifespan and health span, where health span is less than lifespan, that's called a health span-lifespan gap. Ideally, we'd like to have as small a gap as possible. The ideal gap would be 0, I guess, between health span and lifespan, meaning you'd be healthy right up until the day you die. Well, that's the case for some people, and I hope it is for me, as well as all of you. The reality is that there is usually some gap, but the smaller the gap, the better. Now, you may be wondering, what is the gap between health span and lifespan? How long are people living in good health on average? Good question. And a newly released study, as of December of 2024, shows that over the last 2 decades, life expectancy, or lifespan, among 183 World Health Organization member countries, that's increased. But the average health span, or the number of years of life in good health, has increased less than the lifespan. This means that in the last 20 years, the gap between health span and lifespan has increased. In other words, people now are living a smaller percentage of their lives as healthy and vital than they were 20 years ago. Now, to see the charts I'll be talking about here, as well as more detailed show notes and additional resources, be sure to head on over to thefitnessroadmap.com/healthspangap to see all of these information. So, in the 183 countries in the World Health Organization that were part of this survey, over the last 20 years, health span has increased, but it's increased less than the lifespan. So what that's saying is, over the last 20 years, people on average are living longer than they were 20 years ago, and their health span has increased over that 20 years, but it has not increased as much as lifespan. So that's that resulting health span, lifespan gap that we're talking about. So what does that mean? Well, it means that people are living longer, but they're spending more of their lives in ill health. And here in the U.S., we have the distinction of the largest health span, lifespan gap of any of the 183 countries. We're number one in the health span gap. I don't know if that's something we want to be number one in, but right now, that's what we are. We are number one with the largest health span gap of any of the 183 countries. So what does that look like in the U.S.? Well, women right now in the U.S. live about 80.7 years, and men live on average 76.3 years. Now, we know why that's true, right? Because women are smarter than men. Well, the average lifespan across males and females combined is just over 79 years. Now, right now, the current health span for Americans is right around 66 years. That's a big difference. You take the average lifespan of 79 years and you subtract from that the health span of 66 years, and you end up with just over a 12-year difference between lifespan and health span. Now, if you take that 12 years and you divide it into the average lifespan of 79 years, that works out to be about 16% of the average life that is spent in a not healthy state. Now, over the study period, the last 20 years, that gap has increased from 10.9 20 years ago to the current level of about 12.4. So what that's saying is essentially that for almost 13 years out of your average 79 years, if you're in America, you're not going to be in good health. That's a long time to be in bad health, wouldn't you agree? What can we do to close that gap and get our health span closer to our lifespan? When we start taking a look at how to close that gap, I really think it comes down to two main components or two broad areas that we need to be looking at. First is the body, and then secondly, the brain. So basically, the body refers to physical health, and the brain is mental health. Now, when it comes to the body, I think the number one way to reduce that health span gap is to reduce the incidence or occurrence of disease. Major diseases are probably the single largest reason that health span gap exists. And unfortunately, the data does seem to support that. So let's talk about what the major causes of death were in the U.S. in 2023. I've got some recently released information that I think you will see and agree with me that preventing disease is key to increasing our health span and reducing that health span gap. Now, each year, CDC, or the Centers for Disease Control, releases information that shows the summary of the causes of death each year. And recently, as of November of 2024, they came out with their provisional data on the leading causes of death in the U.S. in 2023. Now, once again, to see the chart I'm talking about, as well as more detailed show notes and resources, be sure to head on over to thefitnessroadmap.com/healthspangap. Okay, essentially the chart shows the top 10 causes of death in the U.S. in 2023. Now, there were just over 3 million total deaths in the U.S. in 2023 from all causes. Now, the number one cause at the top of the list, and has been at the top of the list pretty much every year, and it's probably not surprising to you, the number one cause is heart disease, with nearly 680,000 deaths. Second is cancer, all cancers, with 613,000 deaths. Then we have unintentional injuries, so falls and any other injury that is unexpected would be included in this. That is 222,000 deaths. Stroke is next at number 4 with 162,000 deaths. Then we have pulmonary disorders, typically COPD or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, 145,000 deaths. Number 6 is Alzheimer's disease. Now, it's all types of Alzheimer's, including dementia. That was 114,000 deaths. Diabetes comes in at number 7 with 95,000 deaths. Number 8 is kidney disease at 55,000. Then at number 9 is chronic liver disease and cirrhosis at 52,000. And number 10 is pretty much a tie between COVID and suicide, right at 49,000 deaths each. So, out of the top 10 causes of death in 2023, 9 of them are disease-related. The only one that's not a disease is unintentional injuries. All of the other causes of death can be tied to some sort of disease. That seems to me to indicate that if we can reduce or eliminate the occurrence of the disease in the first place, or at least delay its onset till later on in life, we can greatly increase our health span. So, I think that should be a major goal, to reduce the incidence and or delay the occurrence and hopefully prevent the occurrence of major diseases. So, how do we do that? Well, basically, it comes down to doing what we can to fortify our bodies and brains so that they are healthy, strong, and resilient throughout our entire life. Now, we can't control every cause of disease, but we sure can increase the odds in our favor by doing certain things and developing certain habits. So, let's go through a brief rundown of some of the things we can do area by area. First area is physical fitness, strength, mobility, stability, and aerobic endurance. So what we're talking about here is maintaining a strong body, heart, and aerobic system through regular exercise. It's one of the absolute best ways to tilt the odds in our favor when it comes to increasing our health. Exercise is one of the most powerful drugs that we can take to reduce disease and increase our overall health. The impact of exercise compared to all other interventions has been shown to be much stronger, and a much greater impact. A strong and mobile body allows us to remain active and reduces the chance that we fall and become immobile as we age. So part of those unintentional injuries are falls, and falls are a dramatic factor for reducing health span and life, especially as we get older. So anything we can do to reduce the incidence of falls will have a big impact. When it comes to conditioning, anything we can do to work on our aerobic base, you might have heard this is called Zone 2, as well as our aerobic capacity, otherwise known as VO2 max, those two components help our heart and body endure for the long term by reducing the incidence of almost every bad, what are called metabolic diseases. Things like high blood pressure, diabetes, and obesity. The muscle we add through regular strength training provides an important buffer against age-related loss of strength and muscle. The benefits go on, and you can be sure to see a lot more discussions about all of these areas in the future. The second area is emotional well-being, brain health, or brain development. Now, anything we can do to become more intentional about building our brain can help keep our brain vital and healthy for the long term. Our brains can actually grow because of the workouts we give it. Now, this is called neuroplasticity, and it refers to the fact that our brains can actually build new neural pathways and connections. Regular exercise is a huge benefit to overall brain health. Exercise has been shown to release specific growth factors that help the brain become stronger. In addition to exercise and brain building, increasing our enjoyment of life, learning new things, and maintaining a healthy outlook is just as important. If our brains are healthy, there's a much better chance that we're going to enjoy life and increase our health span. The third area is nutrition and diet. Now, this is one of those areas that there's been a lot of argument one way or the other about what's the best diet versus what isn't. Is it keto? Is it fasting? Is it carnivore? Is it vegan? Is it vegetarian? Everybody's got a position pro or con for just about every diet out there. But what I will say generally, and I think it's going to be hard to argue with this, is that we should try to eat as much real food as possible. In other words, reduce our intake of processed foods and eat the highest quality food that we can. Basically, eat real food, eat natural food, and prepare the food ourselves compared to always going out to eat or having pre-prepared or processed food. I think that those things by themselves can increase the average quality of our nutrition and diet across the board, regardless of what diet we follow. But we're going to talk a lot more about the different strategies around nutrition and diet in the future. But for now, I think that's a great place to start. And the last thing I want to talk about as it relates to increasing our health span and reducing that health span gap is financial wellness. Money ultimately provides options, and those options help ensure that our finances can support us as we live longer and longer. Having enough money will make a big difference in our health span. In other words, planning for the future, saving an adequate amount of money to take care of projected costs later in life, staying out of debt, having low financial stress, all of those will contribute to increasing our ability to enjoy life farther and farther into life. Now, I've just touched briefly on these areas. There is obviously a lot more to talk about in each of them. And that's the whole point and goal of this podcast, is to explore the information that's available to us so that we can build our own path towards a longer and healthier life. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow along so we can learn together. So, the big question at the end of the day really is, what would you really rather have? Years in your life, which essentially is just being alive, or life in your years, where you're vital, healthy, active, engaged, and involved? Well, I know which one I'd rather have, and my guess is you probably would agree with me as well. It's going to be life in your years all the time. I will take that over just straight years in my life pretty much any day. How about you? What do you think is most important? Years in your life or life in your years? Hopefully, this gave you some food for thought around how we should be approaching the concept of improving our health and what the goal should be. Not ultimately just to live as long as possible, but to improve our health as much as possible so that we can enjoy life for as long as possible. I'd be interested to know what you think. So be sure to leave a comment in the section of the show notes over at thefitnessroadmap.com/healthspangap, and I'll be interested to hear what that discussion is. I'm also interested in any comments or suggestions you may have for future episodes, or how I can improve the podcast to be more helpful to everyone. You can leave a comment at the individual episode level, or send me an email at mark@thefitnessroadmap.com, and I'll get back to you. I want as many people as possible to get the benefit of listening to this podcast, so I'd very much appreciate anything you can do to get the word out about what we're doing here at the Fitness Roadmap. You can help the show out by subscribing to the podcast and sharing this episode with anyone that you think might be interested in what we're talking about. You can also leave a review at wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing to reduce my own health span gap, you can follow me in a few different places. The first is Strava, which is essentially a fitness social media app. I post all of my activities each day, whether it's running, walking, rucking, cycling, rowing, strength training, or any other intentional physical activity I do. Another place you can follow me is on Zwift, which is a virtual cycling and running game or app. Now, I use Zwift whenever I'm using the indoor bike or treadmill. The third place you can follow me is over on Exer, EXR. This is an indoor rowing app, similar to Zwift, that I use whenever I'm on my Concept 2 rowing machine. Check the show notes for this episode or the About page on the website for the links to each of these so that you can follow along. That's it for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next week, enjoy the journey and be well.